The crystal chandeliers cast their warm, golden glow across the mahogany-paneled dining room of Le Bernardin Elite, where Marcus had worked as a waiter for 3 years. Each chandelier was a masterpiece of European craftsmanship, with hundreds of precisely cut crystals that scattered light like diamonds across the restaurant's most exclusive table. Every surface gleamed with meticulous attention to detail. The mahogany walls were polished to a mirror shine, the brass fixtures caught the light with aristocratic elegance, and the hardwood floors reflected the ambient lighting like still water. Each table was set with pristine white Belgian linens, gleaming Christofle silverware arranged with military precision, and baccarat crystal wine glasses that caught the light like captured starlight. The restaurant catered exclusively to the city's wealthiest clientele, from tech moguls and oil barons to foreign dignitaries and entertainment royalty. Marcus had learned to navigate their demanding expectations with quiet professionalism, understanding that in this rarefied atmosphere, a single misstep could end careers and destroy reputations. Tonight felt different, though. There was an electricity in the air that made his spine tingle with anticipation and dread. The reservation book showed several high-profile names, including tech billionaire Richard Cromwell, whose reputation for ruthless business dealings was matched only by his notorious treatment of service staff. Marcus straightened his black vest, adjusted his silk tie, and checked his reflection in the polished surface of a sterling silver serving tray, preparing himself mentally for what promised to be the most challenging evening of his career. Richard Cromwell arrived fashionably late at precisely 8:30, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone in the restaurant like a magnetic field of wealth and power. He wore a custom-tailored Savile Row suit in midnight blue that probably cost more than Marcus's annual salary, crafted from the finest Italian wool with hand-stitched details that spoke of old-world craftsmanship and new-world excess. His platinum cufflinks, each inlaid with rare sapphires, gleamed under the ambient lighting like captured pieces of the ocean. His handmade Italian leather shoes clicked authoritatively against the hardwood floors, announcing his arrival to anyone within earshot. A Patek Philippe watch worth more than most people's houses adorned his wrist, its complications telling time in multiple global financial centers. The maitre d', a distinguished Frenchman named Henri who had served royalty in his previous position, personally escorted Cromwell to the corner table, the restaurant's most coveted seat, where he could survey the entire dining room like a feudal lord observing his domain. The table offered perfect sightlines to every other patron, allowing Cromwell to catalog the city's elite while enjoying his meal. Marcus approached with practiced grace, his movements fluid and confident despite the nervous energy coursing through his veins. He carried a crystal water pitcher filled with imported French spring water, chilled to the perfect temperature and ready to provide the impeccable service that Le Bernardin Elite was internationally known for. But as he began to pour the water with sommelier-level precision, Cromwell's cold gray eyes assessed him with the calculating gaze of someone who viewed people as either useful assets or disposable obstacles. The billionaire's reputation for systematically humiliating service staff at upscale establishments preceded him like a dark cloud, and Marcus steeled himself for whatever psychological test was about to unfold. The evening progressed with deceptive smoothness until the wine service, that most sacred ritual in fine dining where expertise meets expectation. Marcus had spent 20 minutes in the wine cellar, carefully selecting the 2015 Chateau Margaux that Cromwell had ordered from their extensive collection. A bottle worth more than most people's monthly rent, aged to perfection in climate-controlled conditions that rivaled those of the original chateau. The wine represented the pinnacle of Bordeaux craftsmanship, from one of the greatest vintages of the millennium. As he presented the bottle with the label facing the guest, following the precise sommelier protocol he had memorized through years of training, Cromwell barely glanced at the legendary vintage before waving dismissively with the casual arrogance of someone who treated priceless wines like common table water. Marcus proceeded with the traditional tasting ritual that had been perfected over centuries of fine dining tradition, using a silver taste-of-in to ensure the wine's clarity and pouring exactly 1 ounce into Cromwell's burgundy glass, with movements that would have impressed the masters at Le Cordon Bleu. The billionaire swirled the wine with theatrical precision, inhaled its complex bouquet of dark fruits and earthy undertones, and took a deliberate sip that seemed to last an eternity. His face immediately contorted into an expression of manufactured disgust, and he spat the wine back into the glass with revolting theatricality that would have embarrassed a community theater actor. Other diners began to turn their heads like spectators at a gladiatorial combat, sensing the brewing confrontation with the morbid fascination that wealth and privilege often bring to public humiliation. Marcus felt his stomach drop like a stone thrown into deep water, knowing with crystal clarity that this moment would define not just the rest of his evening, but possibly the trajectory of his entire career in hospitality. "This wine is completely unacceptable," Cromwell's voice boomed across the restaurant like a cannon blast, causing conversations to halt mid-sentence and silverware to freeze halfway to mouths. The acoustic design of the dining room, originally intended to create intimate conversation spaces, now amplified his theatrical outrage to every corner of the establishment. He stood abruptly with the fluid motion of a predator preparing to strike, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a harsh screech that echoed through the now silent dining room like fingernails on a chalkboard. The sound seemed to reverberate off the mahogany walls and crystal fixtures, creating an almost supernatural atmosphere of tension. "How dare you serve me this absolute swill? Do you have any comprehension of who I am?" His face flushed red with manufactured outrage that would have impressed method-acting instructors, and his manicured finger jabbed accusingly at Marcus like a prosecutor pointing at a convicted criminal. The gesture was deliberately theatrical, designed for maximum humiliation and public spectacle. The other patrons watched with a mixture of horrified curiosity and secondhand embarrassment, their own meals forgotten, as they witnessed the psychological warfare unfolding before them like a public execution. Marcus felt the heat of dozens of eyes upon him, each gaze feeling like a physical weight pressing down on his shoulders. His professional composure, developed through years of dealing with difficult customers, was the only thing keeping him upright as Cromwell's tirade continued to build momentum like a runaway freight train. The crystal glasses on nearby tables seemed to vibrate with the intensity of the billionaire's fury, and the very air in the room appeared to thicken with malevolent energy. "I've dined at the finest restaurants in Paris, Tokyo, and New York, establishments that would make this place look like a roadside diner," Cromwell continued, his voice rising with each word like a crescendo in a symphony of cruelty. He grabbed the wine glass with both hands and held it up like evidence in a murder trial, the deep red liquid catching the chandelier light ominously, creating blood-red reflections on the white tablecloth. "This wine is not just corked, it's oxidized, sulfurous, and tastes like vinegar mixed with battery acid. Are you actively trying to poison me, you incompetent fool?" The accusations flew like daggers, each one carefully crafted to inflict maximum psychological damage. Marcus knew with absolute certainty that the wine was perfect. He had personally inspected the bottle in the cellar, checking the fill level, examining the cork through the glass, and ensuring the vintage's provenance. The seal had been intact, the storage conditions optimal, and the wine's legendary reputation spoke for itself. But contradicting a guest of Cromwell's stature and net worth would be professional suicide in an industry where reputation meant everything, and wealthy patrons could destroy careers with a single negative review posted to social media. Henry, the maître d', hurried over from across the dining room, his usually composed demeanor cracking slightly as he wrung his hands nervously, like a man watching his life's work crumble. Other staff members retreated to safer distances, their faces pale with vicarious terror, as they watched one of their own being systematically destroyed. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom, as he searched frantically for words that wouldn't make the catastrophic situation even worse. The silence that followed Cromwell's accusation stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at any moment and send the entire evening spiraling into complete chaos. Cromwell wasn't finished with his carefully choreographed performance of public humiliation. He suddenly swept his arm across the table with the theatrical flourish of an opera villain, sending the wine glass, water goblet, bread plate, and silverware crashing to the floor in an explosive symphony of shattering crystal and porcelain. The cacophony of destruction echoed through the restaurant like a grenade explosion, causing several elderly women to gasp audibly and one distinguished gentleman to clutch his chest as if having a cardiac episode. Fragments of priceless baccarat crystal scattered across the hardwood floor like frozen tears, each piece reflecting the chandelier light in fractured rainbows. The wine spread across the floor like spilled blood, seeping into the grain of the wood and staining the pristine environment with chaos. "This is exactly what I expect from establishments that hire unqualified street trash," he screamed, pointing directly at Marcus's face with the fury of a medieval inquisitor. The insult hung in the air like poison gas, contaminating the refined atmosphere with its venom. "You probably couldn't distinguish between a Bordeaux and a Burgundy if your pathetic life depended on it, could you? How did someone of your obvious intellectual limitations even manage to convince anyone to hire you for this position? The words hit Marcus like physical blows, each carefully chosen insult designed to strip away layers of dignity and self-respect in front of the most influential people in the city. His hands trembled slightly as he began to kneel among the debris, his movements careful and deliberate despite the emotional earthquake shaking his core. His reflection appeared fractured in the scattered crystal shards at his feet, a broken image of a man trying to maintain his humanity in the face of systematic dehumanization. As Marcus crouched among the glittering debris like a supplicant before an altar of cruelty, Cromwell loomed over him with the predatory satisfaction of a serial killer savoring his victim's final moments. The billionaire's shadow fell across Marcus's hunched form, blocking out the warm chandelier light and creating a pocket of psychological darkness. "Look at you, crawling around on the floor where you belong," the billionaire sneered, his voice dripping with contempt so thick it seemed to pollute the very air around them. This is what happens when restaurants lower their standards and hire people who clearly don't belong in civilized society. You're nothing but a pretender, playing dress-up in clothes that don't fit your station. The cruelty in his tone was palpable, seeping into every corner of the dining room like toxic gas. Several diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces showing expressions of disgust that wasn't directed at the broken glass, but at the billionaire's inhuman behavior. Yet none dared to intervene, paralyzed by the complex social dynamics of wealth and power that governed their exclusive world. Marcus's face burned with humiliation as he carefully picked up each razor-sharp piece of crystal, his trained professionalism warring with his fundamental human dignity. Every shard he collected felt like a piece of his self-respect being gathered from the floor. Henri stood helplessly nearby, caught in an impossible position between protecting his dedicated staff member and appeasing a customer whose negative review could destroy the restaurant's reputation and cost dozens of people their livelihoods. The maitre d's usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by the sweating nervousness of a man watching his career balance on a knife's edge. The air itself seemed to thicken with malevolent tension, as if the entire room was holding its collective breath, waiting for this public execution to reach its inevitable, devastating conclusion. Just as Marcus rose from his knees with the collected crystal shards cupped carefully in his palms like precious gems, the restaurant's main entrance door opened with its characteristic soft chime, a sound that usually announced the arrival of another wealthy patron but now seemed to herald something entirely different. An elderly gentleman entered with the quiet confidence that comes from authentic authority rather than manufactured bluster or inherited wealth. He moved through the dining room like a man completely comfortable in his own skin, his presence commanding respect without demanding it. He was impeccably dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that spoke of understated elegance rather than ostentatious display, his silver hair perfectly groomed in a style that suggested both wisdom and vitality. His kind eyes, framed by wire-rimmed glasses, took in the scene with the sharp intelligence of someone who had spent decades reading people and situations with surgical precision. Most of the staff didn't recognize him immediately. He rarely visited during operating hours, preferring to trust his carefully chosen managers, but Marcus had seen his photograph hanging in the employee break room, surrounded by awards for excellence in hospitality and community service. This was James Morrison, the actual owner of Le Bernardin Elite and founder of the Morrison Restaurant Group, a man who had built his culinary empire through decades of backbreaking work, innovative vision, and an unwavering commitment to treating every person with dignity and respect regardless of their station in life. Morrison's penetrating gaze swept methodically over the broken crystal glittering on the floor. The cowering staff members pressed against the walls and finally settled on Cromwell, who was still standing triumphantly over Marcus like a conquistador planting his flag on conquered territory. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Morrison began walking toward their table with measured, purposeful steps that echoed with quiet authority. Morrison approached the scene of destruction with measured steps, his polished Oxford shoes clicking softly against the hardwood floor in a rhythm that seemed to reset the entire room's emotional tempo. The conversations that had tentatively resumed in hushed whispers fell silent once again as diners sensed a fundamental shift in the room's power dynamics, like animals in the wild detecting the approach of an apex predator. Cromwell, still basking in his perceived victory over what he saw as inferior prey, initially didn't notice the distinguished newcomer. He was too busy savoring the complete humiliation he had inflicted, adjusting his sapphire cufflinks with the satisfaction of a general reviewing conquered territory. "That's exactly how you handle incompetent service," he announced to no one in particular, his voice loud enough for everyone in the dining room to hear, clearly expecting admiration for his performance of wealth-enabled cruelty. His chest puffed out with pride as he surveyed the destruction he had caused, the broken crystal and wine stains serving as trophies of his social dominance. Morrison stopped directly beside their table, his presence immediately commanding without being loud, aggressive, or theatrical in any way. His authority emanated from something far deeper than money or social position. It came from the quiet confidence of a man who had built something meaningful and lasting through integrity and hard work. When Cromwell finally looked up from his moment of triumph and saw the distinguished gentleman standing there with the patient stillness of a mountain, his expression shifted through several stages, from smugness to mild annoyance at being interrupted, then to confusion as he tried to place this unexpected player in his carefully orchestrated drama. He had absolutely no idea that he was about to face someone who wielded real power. Not the kind bought with inherited wealth or stock options, but the kind earned through decades of building something greater than himself and creating opportunities for others to flourish. Morrison's voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet, but carried the unmistakable weight of absolute moral authority. Every person in the restaurant, from the busboys to the billionaires, strained to hear his carefully chosen words, sensing instinctively that something historically significant was about to happen. The acoustics of the room, designed to facilitate intimate conversation, now served to amplify the gravity of this moment to every corner of the establishment. "Mr. Cromwell," he said, his tone perfectly polite and professionally courteous, yet somehow more intimidating than any amount of shouting or threats could have been. There was steel beneath the silk of his voice, the kind of quiet strength that comes from absolute moral certainty. "I'm James Morrison, and I am the owner of this establishment." The words landed like stones thrown into still water, creating ripples of recognition and anticipation throughout the dining room. Cromwell's face went through several distinct expressions in rapid succession. Initial confusion as he processed this unexpected development, followed by dawning recognition as he realized who exactly he was dealing with, and then a calculating attempt to salvage the situation through the kind of damage control that wealthy men use when they realize they've overplayed their hand. But Morrison wasn't finished with his measured response. He gestured toward Marcus, who was still standing with the broken crystal cupped in his hands like evidence of human cruelty, his dignity battered, but fundamentally unbroken. "This young man has worked for me for 3 years," Morrison continued, his voice gaining strength and conviction with each word. "He has never once served a questionable bottle of wine, never once shown anything but exemplary professionalism under pressure, and has earned the genuine respect and admiration of every guest who isn't desperately looking for excuses to feel superior to others." The words hung in the air like a moral challenge, transforming the entire dynamic of the confrontation from public humiliation to public judgment. Then Morrison delivered the line that would change everything, alter the trajectory of multiple lives, and become legendary in the city's social circles for years to come. His eyes never left Cromwell's face as he spoke with crystalline clarity and unshakable conviction. "Your reservation has been permanently canceled, and you are no longer welcome in any of my establishments, all 12 of them throughout this city and the surrounding metropolitan area." The words hit Cromwell like a physical blow, his face draining of color as the full implications of this social and economic death sentence began to sink into his consciousness. Morrison's restaurant group was legendary throughout the region, representing not just dining establishments, but cultural institutions where the city's most important business deals were negotiated. Political alliances were forged, and social hierarchies were established and maintained. Being blacklisted from all of them would constitute nothing less than complete social suicide for someone whose entire identity and business network depended on access to these exclusive venues. The other diners watched in stunned, fascinated silence as the tables turned completely. Power shifting from inherited wealth to earned authority in a single devastating sentence. Cromwell opened his mouth to protest, to threaten lawsuits or business repercussions or social retaliation, but Morrison raised a single finger with such quiet authority that it commanded absolute silence more effectively than any gavel in any courtroom. "Security will escort you out immediately," Morrison continued, his voice never rising above conversational level, yet somehow filling every corner of the restaurant with moral authority. And if you ever speak to any of my staff members like that again, anywhere in this city, the consequences will extend far beyond restaurant reservations into territories you cannot begin to imagine." The threat was delivered with such quiet confidence that everyone present understood they were witnessing the exercise of real power. Not the kind that comes from bank accounts, but the kind that comes from building something meaningful and protecting the people who help you build it. Two security guards appeared as if materialized from thin air, their movements so smooth and professional that they seemed to have been waiting in the wings for exactly this moment. They flanked Cromwell with the kind of practiced efficiency that suggested years of experience handling exactly these types of situations, their presence both polite and absolutely immovable. The billionaire's face cycled rapidly through a spectrum of emotions: rage at being challenged, disbelief that his wealth couldn't protect him from consequences, and finally a dawning panic as he realized that his supposed power meant absolutely nothing in this particular arena. "You cannot do this to me," he sputtered, his earlier commanding presence evaporating like morning mist under the sun of real authority. His voice cracked with desperation as the reality of his situation penetrated his consciousness. "Do you have any comprehension of how much money I spend at restaurants like this? Do you understand the influence I wield in this city?" Morrison's smile was thin but genuinely satisfied, the expression of a man who had waited his entire career for exactly this moment to defend his principles. "Money can certainly buy you a meal, Mr. Cromwell, and it can even buy you temporary access to exclusive venues," he replied with devastating calm. "But it cannot and will never buy you the right to destroy another human being's dignity for your own entertainment. Marcus here represents everything noble about the hospitality industry: genuine kindness, unflappable professionalism, and grace under the kind of pressure that reveals a person's true character. You, on the other hand, represent everything that is fundamentally wrong with people who mistake the size of their bank accounts for the measure of their worth as human beings." As the security guards gently but firmly guided Cromwell toward the exit, their hands positioned to prevent any possibility of resistance or further disruption, something magical happened. It started as a slow, deliberate clap from one elderly woman seated near the window, her weathered hands creating a rhythm that seemed to restore the room's natural harmony. Then it spread like wildfire through the dining room until every patron, every staff member, and every person present was giving Marcus a thunderous standing ovation that seemed to shake the crystal chandeliers with its power and conviction. In the weeks and months that followed this legendary confrontation, word of the incident spread through the city's interconnected social circles like wildfire, growing and evolving with each retelling until it achieved the status of modern folklore. Morrison's principled defense of his employee became the stuff of legend, discussed in boardrooms and country clubs, social media platforms, and newspaper columns. The story resonated far beyond the rarefied world of fine dining, touching something fundamental about human dignity and moral courage that transcended class boundaries and economic divisions. Le Bernardin elite experienced an unprecedented surge in reservation requests from people who wanted to dine at the restaurant, where basic human decency had triumphed over wealth and privilege, where integrity had defeated entitlement in full public view. The waiting list for tables extended months into the future, with celebrities, politicians, and business leaders specifically requesting Marcus as their server. He found himself promoted to head waiter within 2 weeks of the incident, with a substantial salary increase and the genuine respect of everyone who heard his story. But more importantly, he discovered that Morrison had built his entire empire on the revolutionary principle that true success meant lifting others up rather than tearing them down, creating opportunities rather than destroying them. The restaurant owner personally mentored Marcus in advanced wine service, business management, and the philosophy of hospitality that had guided his career. The broken crystal from that fateful night had been swept away and replaced, but the lesson it taught remained crystalline in its clarity. Authentic power lies not in the ability to humiliate others, but in the moral courage to stand up for what is right, even when it costs you something. Cromwell, meanwhile, found himself systematically exiled from the very social circles he had once dominated. His behavior that night becoming a cautionary tale whispered at dinner parties about the ultimate price of treating other human beings as less than human. His business relationships began to deteriorate as word spread about his character, and several major deals fell through when potential partners heard the story and decided they didn't want to be associated with someone capable of such cruelty. The incident had revealed something essential about his nature that no amount of wealth could hide or repair. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We hope it resonated with you and reminded you that kindness and respect should never be luxuries reserved for the wealthy. In a world where wealth often seems to excuse inexcusable behavior, stories like this remind us that true character is revealed not in how we treat those who can help us, but in how we treat those who seemingly cannot. Please let us know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. We love hearing from our global community and learning about your own experiences with dignity, respect, and standing up for what's right. Your stories inspire us to keep sharing these meaningful tales that celebrate the triumph of human decency over entitled cruelty.